Yon Ra, the man who murdered Sokka and Katara's mother, walked away from the Southern Water Tribe and lived out the rest of his days in peace. No tribunal, no prison sentence, no reckoning of any kind, just a quiet retirement for a crime that left 2 children motherless. That's the contradiction at the heart of why he looms so large in the show's rogues gallery, and why viewers still see that the outcome. Kia was his target because the Fire Nation believed she was hiding the last waterbender in the Southern Water Tribe, Katara, her daughter. Yon Ra led the Southern Raiders on a mission to capture the remaining waterbenders, and Kia was their target because she was believed to be the last one in the Southern Tribe. She was Sokka and Katara's mother, and she died protecting the very identity the Fire Nation wanted erased from her people. The raid wasn't random cruelty, it was a deliberate strike against the tribe's future, and Kia was the casualty chosen for that mission. The facts pile up fast from there. The Southern Water Tribe never fully recovered from the losses Yon Ra inflicted, and the gap he left in Sokka and Katara's family shaped both of them in ways the show explores across Book 1 and returns to in Book 3. Kia's death was not collateral damage, it was the point. And when Katara finally confronted the man responsible in the Season 3 episode, the Southern Raiders, she made a choice that revealed more about her character than it did about his. She gave him the option of sparing his own life if he could find someone to trade in his place, and he didn't hesitate. His own mother. That detail is the one that turned a straightforward villain moment into something genuinely unsettling. A man willing to hand over the woman who raised him without a second's reflection wasn't operating from fear. He was operating from a pure, uncomplicated selfishness that had no bottom. Katara let him go anyway, and the show framed that as her moral victory. But here's what happened next. Yon Ra went home. He went back to the Fire Nation. He lived out whatever remained of his life, unpunished, unnamed to the larger story, free of consequences. Fans consider that outcome deeply unfair, and they're not wrong about what it says. The show extends mercy to someone who had already proven he would not extend it to anyone. Not his mother, not a woman he hunted across a frozen coastline, not 2 children he left orphaned. The message lands awkwardly. Kindness toward the cruel doesn't ennoble the kind, it just lets cruelty off the hook. Yon Ra is the clearest proof of that in the entire series, a man whose retirement was the real crime. Because it confirmed that nothing about what he did mattered enough to stop him from living the rest of his life. The Warden. If Yon Rha got to retire in peace, the man running the Boiling Rock wanted to make sure no one else did, and he took professional pride in the job. He presided over the highest security prison in the Fire Nation, a facility built inside an active volcano where the water in the surrounding moat was kept at a rolling boil. Zuko joined the gang, and the Warden recognized and seized him when he appeared at the Boiling Rock. Sokka and Suki infiltrated the place to break prisoners out and were quickly discovered and locked down by the Warden. He didn't just win those encounters, he won them with flair, treating each capture as a personal triumph he could describe in detail to anyone within earshot. His arrogance wasn't incidental, it was the whole operating system. The facility was his identity, and he wanted you to know it. Ranker's list of the most hateable characters in Avatar. The Last Airbender includes him, and that placement is earned through specifics, not vibes. When Suki was suspended directly over the boiling water as leverage against Sokka and Toph, who was already a prisoner there, the Warden didn't just threaten her. He described exactly what would happen in calm, precise terms while she struggled, and he enjoyed every word of it. Zuko watched, Sokka watched, the audience watched. That scene is a masterclass in making a villain repulsive. Without giving them complex motivation or tragic backstory, he's just cruel, he's good at it, and he knows it. Defenders point out that he was a prison warden doing a difficult job under a fascist regime, and that's true on its face. But the warden wasn't enforcing rules with detached professionalism. He was tormenting people he found personally interesting, keeping detailed notes on their breakdowns, and threatening a prisoner with being dropped into the boiling water while she dangled over it. The show makes a clear distinction between duty and sadism, and he lands squarely on the wrong side of it every time he's on screen. The image that outlasts everything is the warden grinning while Suki dangles over that boiling water, talking about how he'd love to see her drop. No grand speeches, no philosophy, no justification, just a man who liked his work and wanted you to watch him do it. That's the face of a villain who earns hatred without earning complexity, and it's exactly why he stays in viewers' heads long after the episode ends. Subscribe and tell us in the comments which most hated Avatar character you think was the most fittingly despised. Ming Hua, a Red Lotus waterbender, an escaped fugitive whose mastery of her element is so total that it effectively rewrites the rules of what waterbending can do. Her water appendages serve as substitutes for physical limbs, fluid, precise, and capable of forming multiple separate arms at once, each one ending in a frozen point sharp enough to pierce through solid objects. She constructs her entire combat posture from water alone, spinning it into whips and drills and blades that have no physical anchor holding them back. The scale is 8 water arms operating simultaneously. That's not a stylistic flourish, that's a tactical system. Each appendage moves independently, which means she can strike, grapple, block, and redirect all at once without ever trading positions. She used pressurized water to force open her confinement cell, a feat no physical lock could have anticipated from a bender who treats water as a direct extension of her body. There was no lock built that could anticipate an opponent who rebuilds her own physical form from the element whenever she needs to fight. She and Gozan together overwhelmed Bumi during their clash. A 2-on-1 engagement, Bumi could not survive against opponents who had already proven capable of holding their own against master-level airbenders. The ordinary explanation would be that she trained for years to develop this control, that extreme discipline compensates for any physical limitation, but the facts don't support that frame. She didn't adapt to waterbending. She redefined the relationship between a bender and their element so thoroughly that the absence of physical arms stopped mattering the moment she decided it didn't. The water appendages aren't a workaround, they're an improvement, and that distinction matters more than it sounds, because it means the system designed to hold her was obsolete before it was even built. This reveals something larger about the system the Red Lotus operates inside. Ming Hua didn't emerge from nowhere. She came out of an organization that actively recruits people with something to prove and hands them the tools to prove it. Her power isn't an accident of individual talent, it's the output of a structure designed to take outliers and turn them into walking disasters. A prison like the one the Warden ran can hold anyone with a physical body. It cannot hold someone who rebuilds her body from the element itself every time she needs to fight, because the architecture of that prison was never designed to account for an opponent who doesn't need walls to hold her shape. Long Feng. Where Ming Hua broke the rules of what a waterbender could be, Long Feng represents a system where the rules never existed for him to break in the first place, making him infinitely more dangerous than any individual bender, because he controls the arena everyone else is fighting inside. The Dai Li exist as living proof of that imbalance, his personal enforcers, and the structural reason an Earth King can sit on a throne while Long Feng pulls every decision from the shadows. The show is explicit about the damage. There is no man more hated in Ba Sing Se than Long Feng, and that hatred is earned the moment Team Avatar meets him. His slimy demeanor lands immediately, every gesture calculated, every smile staged, every word chosen to make you feel like you've been let in on something before you realize you've just agreed to something you never wanted. He doesn't need to threaten anyone, he just needs to make them believe cooperating was their own idea. The Dai Li handle the rest, disappearing people who ask the wrong questions or notice the gaps in his story, and the Earth King, nominally the most powerful person in the most powerful city on Earth, exists entirely because Long Feng allows it. Long Feng ranks among the most disliked characters on CBR's list, and the ranking reveals something specific about what makes him detestable. He is not a failure like the others who lost through incompetence or misjudgment. He succeeded completely, and that's precisely what makes him worse. Every other hated character was eventually defeated or broken. Long Feng held Ba Sing Se for years, maintained absolute control over the information reaching both the throne and the public, and built a system where truth itself was structurally impossible to surface without permission. His power is more absolute than the Earth King's because he doesn't hold a title that can be challenged in open debate. He controls the information flow that determines whether anyone even knows there's something to challenge. The Dai Li's institutional authority, built on layers of procedure and protocol, channels back to Long Feng's control over what reaches the Earth King. Every checkpoint, every surveillance layer, every official who VTs information before it reaches the throne, all of it built to make sure Long Feng's position is never threatened by something as inconvenient as public opinion. This was built deliberately. The structure of Ba Sing Se's government, with its concentric layers of control and its elaborate information filtration, wasn't an accident of history. It was engineered specifically to make the population incapable of organizing resistance. Long Feng didn't inherit that system and work within it. He is the reason it functions the way it does. The moment Team Avatar arrived in the city, the mechanism was already in motion, and by the time they understood what they were dealing with, it was already too late. Even when the truth eventually surfaced, the show demonstrates that removing one Grand Secretariat doesn't dismantle the architecture of deception that made his position possible. It only changes who's currently occupying the seat, which is exactly why he earns his place on a list of the most hated characters in the entire series, not for what he did, but for what he built and made sure would outlast him. Admiral Zhao. Where Long Feng failed through excessive caution and bureaucratic control, Zhao failed through the exact opposite impulse, unrestrained aggression deployed without strategy, patience, or self-awareness. Both men were ultimately destroyed by their hatred of the Avatar, but Zhao's destruction was louder, faster, and far more spectacularly pointless. He was the first villain the Fire Nation sent after Aang, and the resources he commanded made that hunt feel genuinely existential. By the time he was hunting the Avatar across the four nations, he had the Yuyan archers at his disposal, an elite archery division in the Fire Nation's service, and a fleet of Fire Nation ships large enough to constitute a full naval armada. When Commander Zhao was promoted to Admiral, his promotion represented a significant elevation within the Fire Nation's military hierarchy, placing him in command of the Northern Water Tribe campaign. Zhao debuted in the episode The Southern Air Temple, where he revealed himself not merely as a military officer, but as a firebender consumed by personal obsession. He was aggressive, foul-tempered, and deeply impatient, qualities that had apparently served him well enough to earn his rank, but that would ultimately sabotage every mission he touched. He couldn't tolerate Zuko's presence at any point in the hunt, treating the banished prince as competition rather than an asset, and his impulsive decision-making consistently overrode the careful planning the Fire Nation's war machine was capable of. The Siege of the North should have been a decisive victory. He had the fleet, he had the archers, he had overwhelming numerical superiority. He lost because he couldn't stop himself from killing the Moon Spirit, and he couldn't stop himself from burning his own ships to spite Zuko. And before the obvious counter-argument surfaces, yes, Zhao did have moments of competent tactical thinking, and yes, he was a genuinely imposing presence in the first half of Book 1, but that competence was window dressing. Every strategic decision he made independently collapsed because it was filtered through impatience. He burned his fleet in a rage. He antagonized allies into enemies. He destroyed a spiritual entity on a whim and then discovered the consequences were catastrophic and immediate. His aggression wasn't strength, it was the mechanism of his destruction, and it took an entire armada down with him. What that makes Zhao, in the end, is the Avatar universe's most expensive lesson in emotional regulation. The Fire Nation invested staggering resources into his campaign, ships, archers, political capital, and he squandered every bit of it because he couldn't tolerate being one step behind a 12-year-old monk. Unalaq. If Zhao had a strange kind of competence, the visceral energy of someone who at least believes something, even if he was wrong about everything, Unalaq has none of that. Where Zhao burned hot and fast, Unalaq is merely bland, underwhelming, and cartoonishly evil, without a single quality that makes him compelling to watch. He entered Book 2 of The Legend of Korra as Korra's uncle and spiritual mentor, the younger brother of Tonrak, who offered to train the Avatar in the ways of the spirits, and he exited as a villain so generic that he makes every other antagonist in the franchise look like a carefully drawn character study. Unalaq stands alone as the one villain with zero sympathetic qualities and zero coolness factors, a figure so colorless that his own children, Desna and Eska, have more distinct personalities in their first scene than he maintains across an entire season. Here's where it gets worse. Unalaq's villainy didn't arrive as a sharp twist, it landed as a structural problem for the entire show. The moment he stopped being a well-meaning spiritual guide and started being revealed as the architect of Tonrak's banishment from the Northern Water Tribe, Korra's own father was thrown in prison and the Southern Water Tribe was invaded under the guise of spiritual instruction. That's the moment the season stopped being a curiosity about the spirit world and started being a problem for anyone invested in the world Korra inhabits. Unalaq wasn't a rogue spiritual leader making a bad call. He was the chief of the Northern Water Tribe, using his position to occupy the South Pole and force its residents to adopt Northern customs, which is the kind of cultural imperialism the original series explicitly condemned. A specialist in narrative structure would argue that the deeper failure isn't Unalaq's design, but what he reveals about the season's architecture. Unalaq's real plan, opening both the northern and southern spirit portals, merging with the dark spirit Vaatu, and essentially becoming a god, introduces a good and evil binary through Rava as the spirit of light and Vaatu as the spirit of darkness, which directly contradicts the Avatar setting's established theme of balance. It's not a subtle philosophical shift, it's a foundational rewrite, and Unalaq is the narrative vehicle for it. His motivations for uniting the material and spirit worlds aren't fleshed out. His development feels rushed. His look is nearly identical to Tarlok's, making them difficult to distinguish, and his plan to occupy the South and force Northern customs on its people undermines the political complexity the show had previously built. Unalaq is widely regarded by fans as one of the least compelling villains in the franchise, tied directly to the worst season of The Legend of Korra, and the reason is structural. He's not a villain who enhances the world he's in. He's a villain who dismantles it, and the show never gives you a moment to care that he did. Zaheer. Where Unalaq destroyed one city, Zaheer set out to collapse every kingdom on the continent. Born after the air nomad genocide, he grew up as a non-bender in a world that had already erased the culture he would later spend decades mastering. He became known for his dedication to air nomad culture and airbending philosophy, an ardent follower of Guru Laghima, a legendary airbender who had supposedly attained the power of independent flight. He was also a prominent member of the Red Lotus and believed he could guide the new Avatar toward his ideals even before acquiring airbending. Nobody thought that was a problem until they had to. After the Red Lotus failed to abduct Avatar Korra as a toddler, Zaheer was placed not in cells designed to block bending, but in isolation on a durable mountaintop prison. His captors assumed a non-bender required no special containment. They were wrong. During Harmonic Convergence in Book 2, Spirits, the spiritual energy surge that randomly bestowed airbending on people around the world with air nomad ancestry, hit Zaheer too. He gained the ability to airbend and quickly became proficient, then engineered his escape from isolation. He freed each member of the Red Lotus still in captivity and refocused the organization entirely, not toward kidnapping Korra, but toward convincing her to join their cause and orchestrating a full anarchist overthrow of every existing kingdom in pursuit of total freedom. He needed to find Korra first. Disguised under the alias Yoru, he joined the newly reformed Air Nation and immediately impressed the inexperienced new airbenders with a depth of air nomad cultural knowledge no one else could match. Pali, his girlfriend, died at the Northern Air Temple during the Red Lotus's attempt to seize Korra. His last appearance came in the episode Beyond the Wilds, and he had first entered the series in A Breath of Fresh Air in 2014. Critics received him as one of the most complex and intimidating villains in the franchise's history, a thoughtful, soft-spoken philosopher of total freedom who killed when he decided it served the cause. What makes Zaheer difficult to place in the usual villain taxonomy is that he is not a corrupted mentor, not a dark spiritual double, not a power-hungry conqueror. People reach for those analogies because the show keeps giving him the posture of one. But he is a non-bender who spent his entire adult life studying airbending texts and political philosophy, who got his shot at the power he had only read about the moment it became physically possible, and who then used that power with a clarity and consistency that left no room for the greed, ego, or attachment that drove most of his predecessors. Confusing him with a typical power seeker misses what made him dangerous. He genuinely believed what he was saying. Kuvira, she takes the shape of every authoritarian conqueror the franchise has produced, but she is built from an entirely different origin. The previous item was a philosopher who became a terrorist. This one is a soldier who became a state. Known as the Great Unifier, Kuvira served as the de facto leader of the Earth Kingdom, later renamed the Earth Empire, with prior occupations as dancer and captain of the Zhao Fu Guard. She was abandoned by her birth parents and taken in by Suyin Beifong at age 8, raised separately from Suyin's biological children. She became engaged to Baatar Jr., Suyin's biological son, making him both her adoptive brother and her fiancé, a family structure that the show treated as entirely unremarkable. She is a key character in the latter seasons of The Legend of Korra. Critics received her mostly positively, noting her motives as understandable and pointing to real political analogues in her methods. Defenders present her story as straightforward. The Earth Kingdom was collapsing, no one else would step up, and Kuvira did what needed to be done with competence and discipline that her rivals lacked. That explanation is fair on its own terms. What it fails to cover is that Kuvira's entire identity was forged in a household built on Suyin Beifong's rejection of hierarchy and authority, the same values the Earth Empire came to enforce with absolute rigidity. She did not inherit Zhao Fu's democracy. She absorbed its contradictions and built a regime out of them. Her metal bending, her military precision, her insistence that unity required total submission, all of it traced back to the orphan who decided that belonging had to be earned through perfection, and that perfection looked like control. And that is a small version of the problem. What Kuvira proved, and what every villain in this category proves in a different register, is that the systems producing the most hated figures are never operating the way their defenders claim. They promise order, and they deliver the conditions that make the next authoritarian inevitable. She was raised by the most libertarian political leader the Earth Kingdom ever produced, in a city founded on the principle that no one person should rule, and she became its most effective dictator. That mechanism, order breeding the need for more order, discipline demanding total submission, is the engine. Kuvira is just the version that won. Fire Lord Ozai. He commands every soldier, every ship, and every weapon in the most devastating military campaign this world has ever seen. Yet the scariest thing about him isn't what he controls. It's what he dreams of doing with it. He was born the second son of Fire Lord Azulon, making him the younger brother of Iroh and uncle to Lu-Ten, Zuko, and Azula, and from that position he built something that would reshape an entire planet. Ozai became the Fire Lord under whose rule the Fire Nation achieved a mass buildup of industry, ruling with an iron fist that let no dissent survive. His family's legacy of conquest found its most dangerous expression in him, and he wielded it without hesitation. His ultimate plan was as precise as it was monstrous. He intended to harness Sozin's comet at the height of the comet's pass, which would amplify every firebender's power to an unprecedented degree, and on that single day he planned to wipe out the entire Earth Kingdom in one devastating strike. Every battle, every siege, every burned village, and conquered city across 100 years of war was just prelude to that moment. The final Agni Kai wasn't a spontaneous duel, it was the scheduled conclusion to a plan decades in the making, and Aang knew it. That psychological pressure showed long before the two ever stood across from each other. Aang experienced nightmares about confronting Ozai, demonstrating that the Fire Lord had already occupied the Avatar's mind before their final battle had even begun. The hold was that complete. Character motivation didn't matter to Ozai, mercy didn't matter to Ozai, the lives of millions didn't matter to Ozai, only the comet, only the strike, only his name carved permanently into history. Defenders of his character point to Iroh as proof that the Fire Nation could produce goodness, but that argument falls apart against what Ozai actually built. His own son was banished after Ozai perceived cowardice and disrespect in him. His entire philosophy is power without conscience, a system designed to crush opposition rather than reform it. Iroh represents a path Ozai deliberately chose not to walk. So why does Ozai still demand explanation? Because the story never fully settles the question his existence raises. How does a society recognize and stop a tyrant before he consolidates enough power to end the world? The narrative shows us the aftermath, a century of war, a planet permanently scarred, but it leaves the deeper question hanging. Nobody investigated how the Fire Nation's institutions allowed Ozai to rise, or what it would have taken to prevent the Comet Plan before the comet was already in the sky. The series skips past that to the duel, and the duel is what we remember. But Ozai is really a question about systems, about how power concentrates and how hard it is to unmake once it's settled, and the show doesn't fully answer it. Azula. She is renowned for creating bright blue flames, a rare and advanced firebending ability she displays while still a child. She's the Fire Nation princess, Ozai's daughter, and she has been bred for cruelty the way other children are bred for sport. Her father's ruthlessness was a template she copied because his praise was the only affection she ever reliably received. She was passionate and determined to capture the Avatar, and she was hot on Team Avatar's trail throughout the show, creating fight scenes and betrayals so sharp that child viewers on Nickelodeon hated her with a specificity they rarely reserved for any other antagonist. Her manipulative, sadistic, and toxic personality made that hatred feel earned in real time, episode after episode. She represented the other side of Zuko's parental discourse. Where Zuko spent 3 seasons desperately seeking approval from a father who had banished him, Azula was the daughter who received it, and the price of that approval was everything decent in her. She catered to Ozai's cruelty because it was the only language he spoke, and she believed her banished mother preferred Zuko over her, a wound that turned into open contempt. She was never given proper guidance, never shown a different model for how to relate to people, and by the time she stood across from Zuko in the final act, she was too far gone for anything except a complete break. Her father Ozai praised her powerful firebending combat skills, and those skills are real. She fights with a precision and ferocity that makes her, in many moments, more dangerous than her father ever is on screen. Ozai rules from a throne. Azula infiltrates. She burns trust. She burns loyalty. She burns the bonds between people who thought they were safe from her, and her hatred spreads outward in a way that affects every corner of the narrative she touches. How does someone so young become so expertly cruel? The show never answers that to its own satisfaction. Amon. The Equalists rallied behind a mask promising to strip bending from the world, but the man behind it was himself the movement's most devastating contradiction, a waterbender preaching that bending was a curse. Unalaq, son of Republic City gangster Yakone, master bloodbender capable of channeling blood without a full moon, the most powerful bender on either side of the conflict and lying about every part of it. His public story told of a firebender who murdered his family and carved his face into scarred ruin, leaving him with nothing but rage and a crusade. The story played perfectly victim, survivor, reluctant warrior for justice, and it gave Equalists a martyr's face to rally behind. Millions of Republic City citizens watched that mask on screens and believed the man underneath had every reason to hate everything Korra represented. Here's where it gets worse. Amon didn't just bend blood in secret, he did it publicly, in broad daylight, in the middle of his most important speeches and operations, and he never seemed to run out of the strength to do it. Standard bloodbending requires a full moon. Amon's father Yakone could push it to daytime through sheer talent, but even he couldn't sustain it for long. Amon held it continuously, walking through rooms of armed metal benders and police officers and stopping them all with a gesture. He'd been doing it since he was a child. Yakone training his two sons in the family's most closely guarded art, decades of mastery compressed into a young man who could bring an entire task force to its knees without breaking a sweat. The mask concealed not just a bender, but one of the most gifted bloodbenders who ever lived. The reasonable explanation is that Amon genuinely believed his own ideology, that his anti-bender stance was a logical extension of everything his father had done to him. It's a clean story. The problem is that it doesn't fit the facts. Amon hated people who use their power to bully those who are weak. Amon led the Equalists in a campaign against bender oppression in Republic City. Amon led the anti-bender revolutionary group known as the Equalists. The reasonable explanation accounts for his rage. It doesn't account for his strategy. Amon, born Unalaq, was the son of Yakone and a powerful bloodbender who learned his craft without a full moon. What he built wasn't equality. It was a world where he'd never again be the victim of someone else's bending, where no one would ever have power over him because he'd taken it all for himself. The mask made him a symbol. The bloodbending made him unstoppable. The ideology was just the wrapper. Vaatu. Where Amon's horror was a man hiding a terrible truth about himself, Vaatu's horror is the opposite. A being entirely without the pretense of humanity, a force of pure chaos that predates civilization and will outlast it. Over 10,000 lifetimes old, existing before humanity existed, Vaatu is the primordial spirit of chaos and darkness, the dark half of the universe's natural balance, the eternal counterpart to Ra'ava, spirit of light and peace. They are not enemies in the conventional sense. They are the two halves that kept each other in check for epochs before the first human took a breath, and when one moves, the other must respond. When Wan accidentally freed Vaatu from his ancient prison within the Tree of Time in the spirit world, the release wasn't just a prison break, it was a cascade failure across both worlds. Avatar Wan had sealed Vaatu away for over 10,000 years precisely because the spirit's strength grows as chaos spreads. The more disorder exists in the world, the more powerful Vaatu becomes, making him a progressively greater threat that feeds on its own success. He is, for all practical purposes, immortal, capable of gradually regenerating in darkness even when Ra'ava overcomes him. Vaatu merged with Unalaq to create the Dark Avatar, taking control of Unalaq's waterbending and using it as a vessel to manifest in the physical world, something that should have been impossible for a spirit. He vowed to destroy Ra'ava once and for all and plunge the world into eternal darkness. Ra'ava was forced to merge with Wan, the first Avatar, to stop him, And that fusion, that cycle, that chain of reincarnation stretching from Wan through Aang to Korra, exists solely because of the threat Vaatu poses. Rava fused with Wan to become the first avatar, creating the cycle that would span millennia. For 10,000 years, Vaatu was sealed within the Tree of Time. Rava defeated him in their final confrontation and resealed him there. But the nature of Vaatu's existence raises a question that no character in the series ever fully addresses. If Vaatu and Rava are two halves of the same whole, bound together by the same cosmic law that creates and maintains the universe's balance, then what does it mean to imprison one half of existence indefinitely? The show treats Vaatu as simply evil and Rava as simply good, and the moral weight of sealing away chaos itself for 10,000 years is left entirely unexplored. Hou-Ting. Born into great wealth and prestige, crowned Earth Queen of Ba Sing Se, and ranked among the most disliked characters across the entire Legend of Korra run, a placement that should tell you everything about what she did with that power. Where the previous item corrupted the world from outside it as a spirit of pure chaos, this one owned the world from within it, treating every person, every field, every coin in the Earth Kingdom as her personal property to dispose of however her mood dictated. Any interaction with Hou-Ting was an extremely dangerous endeavor because her mood could swing without warning, and everyone around her knew it. She displayed neither compunction nor compassion during her reign. The Earth Queen ruled with the specific cruelty of someone who had never been told no. She levied taxes on refugees who had fled the chaos she had done nothing to prevent, hoarded resources while her people starved, and used the full weight of her authority to crush anyone who looked at her wrong. The Dai Li, the secret police Ba Sing Se was famous for, served her interests without question, and she wielded them as casually as a noblewoman might fan herself. This wasn't a ruler who occasionally made a cruel call. This was a system where cruelty was the operating principle, and she sat at the center of it wearing a silk dress and a smile. Zaheer's assassination of Hou-Ting is one of the most debated moments in Book 3. He didn't just kill her, he ripped the air from her lungs and let her die gasping, publicly in the middle of the street. Some viewers have called the killing overly violent, arguing she did not deserve it. Here's the problem with that argument. It's true, but it doesn't do the work people think it does. Yes, she was a tyrant who exploited and oppressed. Yes, her death might have served justice on some level. But what Zaheer actually did was murder a helpless woman through suffocation, a method chosen precisely for its terror, and he did it in front of a crowd of terrified civilians who had already been living under his thumb. What her story ultimately exposes isn't whether she deserved to die, it's how thoroughly the Earth Kingdom's political architecture depends on the decency of whoever sits at the top. Hou-Ting was not an aberration. She was the product of a system that had no mechanism to remove a tyrant from power, no accountability structure beyond whatever personal restraint a monarch happened to possess. The Earth Queen treated everything within the Earth Kingdom as her personal property because, in every meaningful legal sense, it was. The people had no rights she was bound to respect because the institution had never been built to require it. Sozin. He's different from the tyrants and spirits we've been discussing. Where Hou-Ting inherited a kingdom and exploited its flaws, Sozin inherited a throne and then deliberately dismantled every system that might have constrained him, starting with the Fire Sages, whose independence he crushed to consolidate religious authority under his own political power. He is one of the most hated characters in Avatar, The Last Airbender according to Ranker fan rankings, and the reason has nothing to do with power itself and everything to do with how he chose to use it. He helped kill Avatar Roku, and then he started the 100-Year War by slaughtering the air nomads. Those two acts, taken together, explain nearly every tragedy the original series spends 3 seasons trying to resolve. The air nomad genocide didn't just erase a culture, it reset the Avatar cycle, meaning the world lost its spiritual guardian for a generation, leaving nations vulnerable to exactly the kind of domination Sozin was planning. And he didn't stumble into this. His earliest flashbacks showed him as a kind man who stood beside his friend, the Avatar, who seemed to believe in the same things Roku did, which makes the betrayal somehow worse than if he had always been cruel. He was given a model of goodness and chose to destroy it. The specific betrayal of Roku is what fans consistently identify as the worst action in the show's history, and it's not close. Roku was Sozin's friend, not an ally, not a political rival, his friend. And on the night of a volcanic eruption that should have united them, Sozin let him die. He had a chance to save Roku and chose not to, because Roku's survival meant Roku's ability to stop him. That is the logic of a man who weighs friendship against conquest and picks conquest every single time. What makes it irredeemable to fans is that Sozin had every reason to be better. The flashbacks prove he knew how, he just decided not to be. Sozin forced the previously independent Fire Sages to submit to the Fire Nation's political authority when he sparked the 100-Year War, and that move reveals exactly what kind of villain he was. He didn't just want military victory, he wanted total ideological control, which meant capturing the spiritual infrastructure of his own nation so that no priest could question a Fire Lord's legitimacy ever again. The Fire Sages had served the Avatar, not the throne, for centuries, and Sozin recognized that their independence was a structural threat to his ambitions. By subordinating them, he made himself unaccountable to anything beyond his own will, and the consequences rippled outward for 100 years. There isn't any coming back from what he did, and that's precisely why he ranks among the most hated. A villain who is pure evil from the start offers no contrast, no tragedy, no sense of what was lost. Sozin had a friend who trusted him, a world that gave him a chance, and a path ahead of him that didn't require genocide. He chose the fire. He chose the comet. He chose to burn a people who had never harmed him because he believed the Fire Nation deserved to rule everything it could touch, and because his friend stood in the way. The fact that it began with a betrayal of the person closest to him is what makes it unforgivable, because it wasn't ignorance or fear or coercion. It was a choice.